Hey, it's me, Jetski, and today we're back with more Lost Media, specifically talking about the franchise known as Pac-Man that started all the way back in the 1970s. Now, it's a very popular franchise, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been quite a bit of Lost Media from it. Now, before we start though, I will ask you to please like and sub, as it really helps out the channel. We're trying to hit 200 subscribers sooner than later. Anyways, let's hop right into the video. Now, the first piece of Pac-Man Lost Media that we are talking about is actually quite infamous, as it's something known as Pac-Man VR, a VR game from 1996 that you could download for free on a Namco website. Now, for the time, it was quite revolutionary, but comparing it nowadays to stuff we have now, like the Oculus and stuff, it's terrible, but truly for its time, it was definitely revolutionary. Now, unfortunately, there are no existing ROMs of this game, which is very unfortunate. However, there is quite a bit of footage and a few GIFs of the game. Most of these GIFs are actually really cool, considering they have a cel-shaded kind of style. Unfortunately, the game itself, though, from the footage that we've all seen, does not actually have this style. It has a very, late 90s pre-rendered look, and it just doesn't look that good, to be honest. Now, to be honest, it's really hard to tell how this game controls. To be honest, the footage makes it look very disorienting, and I don't know how fun it would be personally. I don't think that fun, to be honest, but it's still an interesting part of Pac-Man history that I do think needs to be discovered one day. The next piece of Pac-Man Lost Media is incredibly infamous. It's a game known as Pac-Man Ghost Zone for the PS1. Now, what makes this game so special is that it was Namco's first ever attempt at making a Pac-Man 3D platformer. That's right, it was the first ever attempt. Now, if you know anything about Pac-Man Lost Media in general, you probably know about this one. It's pretty infamous, well known. A lot of ROMs have come out recently. It is actually playable, but it is a really interesting part of Pac-Man history. A lot of things about this game are a lot more interesting too, like the pre-rendered cutscene, which is admittedly semi-lost. Honestly, this game has a quite tragic backstory, especially compared to other video games like it. See, the team only had like 2 weeks to get a game put together, at least a demo, to give an idea of what this game was going to be. And that's not enough time to put together a 3D platformer. Nevertheless, a 3D platformer in the 1990s, this was a whole new realm, which explains a lot of its shortcomings as a game. If you don't know, this game actually has tank controls, and the only reason it has tank controls is simply because it was just so much easier to program. Games like Mario 64, Crash Bandicoot, and Sonic Adventure in the later half of the 90s were an extreme rarity. In fact, most 3D platformers from the time just had simple tank controls, and those games did not age well, but I mean, it was the best they could do back in the 90s. It was a very hard thing to do, making fully 3D movement. Unfortunately, Namco was not impressed. The president of Namco actually fired almost everyone off the team, except for like 2 people. One was a designer and the other, I think, was just an artist. But most of these people were fired. They lost their jobs because they did their best to try and create a 3D platformer in about 2 weeks. That's like an impossible task. Even like nowadays, that would be incredibly hard. Honestly, I'm surprised they got such a decent game put out, especially in like 2 weeks. It's sad that we'll never really get to see what this game could have looked like had it had more time and really budget put behind it, but honestly, it might have been for the best in the end. I mean, in the end, we ended up getting Pac-Man World and Pac-Man World 2, which is, if not one of the best 3D platformers, especially from this early 2000s kind of generation. Unfortunately, that's really all I have to say about Pac-Man Ghost Zone. It's a sad story, and it really didn't end very well for most people who worked on it. But, I mean, we got a good game out of it eventually. In fact, we got a whole good game series out of it, Pac-Man World 1, 2, and 3. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all I have to say on this one. On to the next piece of Pac-Man Lost Media. The next piece of Pac-Man Lost Media is one of, if not the most infamous Pac-Man Lost Media ever. It's a little game known as PACCIE now. PACCIE has a very infamous history with the game company known as Phoenix Games. Now, if you don't know who Phoenix Games is, they're basically a gaming company that makes video games that are basically based off of the Disney movies, like Peter Pan, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, although they're horrible ripoffs that actually have nothing to do with them. They're basically bootleg game company, pretty much. That's pretty much their whole thing. and they decided they'd rip off Pac-Man in a weird sort of way with a game called PACCIE. Now, what makes this game so much more interesting than anything else they've ever done is that it's not exactly based off Pac-Man specifically. It's also based off a other game called PACCIE, which is itself a ripoff of Pac-Man. Now, it gets even crazier. I know what you guys are thinking. It cannot possibly get any crazier. Well, it can. Apparently, the cover art and the whole look of this game was stolen from some random website in the late 90s. It gets even weirder too, because apparently this game was actually supposed to come out around the same time the original Pac-Man World did on the PS1, which is crazy to me. You know they would have gotten sued. Eventually, though, they just gave up on the PS1 version and eventually sent it off for the PS2. What makes this game even weirder, though, is the fact that it wasn't even going to be developed by Phoenix Games itself. Instead, it was going to be published by Phoenix Games. Now, if you don't know anything about Phoenix Games, their whole game procedure is really weird. What they usually do is they take a game idea, make a cover for it or whatever, and ship it off to some random game company, have them make the game. They take the game back, take all the credit for it, and publish it. It's such a weird thing, and apparently the rumor on the street is that they could not get somebody to make this game for them, which is crazy to me. As many crappy games as they got out, apparently they just couldn't get a remake of a ripoff of a Pac-Man game to be made. That was just too far past the line for most people. PACCIE is a really interesting story, and I think I've gone in depth on it as much as I can in this video, because there's still a couple other things I really want to get to, but it's a really interesting story. There's a lot of other videos out there. If you want to learn more about it, there's tons of videos out there, like I just said. That's pretty much all I have to say on this piece of lost media, though. On to the next one. The next piece of Pac-Man Lost Media is the demo for Pac-Man World from 2010. Yeah, that's right, there was supposed to be a game about Pac-Man in 2010 that also was called Pac-Man World. Basically a soft reboot of the Pac-Man World franchise, with Pac-Man rocking a completely different design and moveset. Also, a weird personality that somewhat seems a lot like Crash Bandicoot. In fact, this whole game gives me lots of Crash Bandicoot vibes, although it's really interesting. It hasn't really ever been seen outside of a couple concept videos. Apparently there is a demo somewhere out there, though, far beyond the plane of view, apparently. I haven't been able to find anything on it. The only thing I really found on it was this video posted by the Newman from Pac-Land. That's pretty much all I have to say on this piece of lost media from Pac-Man. On to the next one. Now, the last piece of Pac-Man Lost Media that we will be talking about today is something known as Miss Pac-Man Maze Mania 2, which was supposed to come out sometime in 2005 for the GameCube, original Xbox, and PS2. Now, this game was just weirdly, abruptly canceled, basically out of nowhere, for basically no reason. I couldn't really find any details on why it got canceled, but it for sure never came out. It's a really interesting piece of Miss Pac-Man history, as it was one of the last Miss Pac-Man games that was supposed to come out on consoles before we've seen her last. To be honest, we haven't really seen very many Miss Pac-Man games as of recent. Unfortunately, there's not very much information on this one, which leads me to basically saying that's pretty much all I have to say on this piece of lost media. On to the conclusion. In conclusion, a lot of this stuff is really interesting, and it shows even a character as famous as Pac-Man can have tons of forgotten lost media out there, still just be waiting to be discovered. Of course, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff we don't even know about yet, like I didn't talk about any plushes or toys that have been around. I'm sure there's a lot of lost Hanna-Barbera stuff from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon from the 1970s. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out there from Pac-Man that we still haven't seen to this very day, but as long as we bring awareness to stuff that we do know about, we can help find other stuff out there. That's pretty much all I have to say for this video, though. If you liked it, please like and sub, as it really helps out the channel. Let's see if we can't hit the 200 subscribers sooner than later. Anyways, it was Amiya Jetski, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.